Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am Summit Sam, aka Low Gear, and today we're going to discuss the worst things on the AT according to me. If you've been watching my videos, you know I did a southbound hike this year, well, I guess last year now, 2023. Started in June at Katahdin and ended up on Springer Mountain in November. So, putting that in perspective, I'm going to discuss the things that I really disliked on the AT. So, number one, the bugs. If you're planning to do a hike on the AT, you will encounter bugs. That's just, there's no way around it. But for southbounders, particularly in New Hampshire and Maine, the bugs are particularly dreadful. And they were on the last hike in 2023 because they had so much rain. We had a particularly bad season of black flies and mosquitoes, as expected to be bad, but since the record high rainfalls and the excess water, it was just a breeding ground for them everywhere. So you'll see lots of videos if you watch the earlier parts where they're just infiltrating my nose. I learned to snort mosquitoes. Don't recommend it. Had plenty of them die in my coffee. It was a morning ritual. So not a big fan of the bugs. Now, the other bug, which I didn't really anticipate being a problem, I mean, I know they're out there in August, wasps and yellow jackets, I believe. But this year, and a lot of people said this, that they were particularly aggressive. There are lots of really big nests. We even had some warnings on the trail about sections where there were really large nests and you had to be careful of. So I didn't anticipate that, and they were vicious. I got bit many times. A lot of the Sobo crew I was with got bit multiple times this year. So not a huge fan of the wasps. Ticks, on the other hand, were not a problem. So I just didn't really have an issue with them. I think I had 2 of them on me the whole time. They never attached. Jeff had, I think, maybe 2 or 3, maybe only 1 attached. Now, the northbounders did say that it was a bad tick year, but for the southbounders, wasn't an issue. So there you go. The second bad thing on my list, I suppose, would be the hiker hobble. The hiker hobble is, as soon as you start doing any long distance hiking or hiking for a particularly good length of time, you're going to start noticing that you seize up a bit. And you end up, at the end of your hiking day, you sit down to start cooking a meal, and then you try to get up and your joints just, they don't bend, they hurt. You kind of walk around like a little stiff man weeble wobble. It's not a pretty sight, and we all do it. Doesn't matter if you're day 2 or day 200, you're going to have it. Now, I am 50, so maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe if you're younger, it's not such a big deal. But I saw a lot of young people still doing the hiker hobble. And everyone does joke about it. So I'm pretty sure it's fairly universal in the hiking world. So not a big fan of that. And it did take me a good month and a half after hiking before I completely let go of the hiker hobble. Now, my number 3 on my top list of things I hate is wet feet. Now, as I mentioned, we had a particularly wet year, and you always had wet feet. We had wet feet for about 2 days straight, or 2 months straight. Whether it was actually raining that day or the puddles, the bogs, you were always having wet feet. Certainly there were lots of water crossing, but even if you tried to take your shoes off for that, I just gave up after a point because my feet were just always wet, so it didn't really matter. Even if you had a chance to dry them out on a 0 day, for example, as soon as you got back on the trail, they were wet again. So we just always had wet feet. And with the wet feet, you always had wet clothes. It's not that your clothes couldn't dry, they can, but with your sweat, and by the time you finish the hike and you hang your clothes up to dry for the night and you try to put them on in the morning, they're going to be damp. The AT, the East Coast, is notorious for being damp and humid, and things just don't dry well. So that first morning of every day, just putting on wet shoes and wet clothes, wet sports bras, wet underwear, it got nasty. I did not enjoy putting on the wet clothes, and I really don't enjoy putting on wet clothes in the morning. So those are definitely my top things I hated about the AT. Other things that I would definitely put on this list is cell service. Now, that could be because I chose a really poor service provider. I'm from Canada, so I just grabbed a easy one to get along with for data and cell service on the hike. And I think maybe I chose a poor one because there were a lot of times we'd get to the trailheads and I thought we would get cell service. And to be fair, I probably could have planned it better, but I didn't. And we wouldn't, so we'd have to hitchhike in. And sometimes those hitchhikes were long and it was raining or it just, yeah. So pick a good cell service provider because mine sucked. And I really hated not having access to some form of communication. Now, it did get better the further south we went. So maybe that's just a Maine, New Hampshire access thing. But it was definitely on my top list of things I did not like. And moving on, the next thing I would say is snoring in shelters. Now, I don't mean to pick on the men because you are not the only ones, but there just seem to be a lot more men in the shelters. But snoring in the shelters is quite common. We all snore, whether it's the chainsaw type of snoring or the motorboat snoring. And people always say, oh, I don't snore. Yeah, you snore and you fart. And if you're a light sleeper, you're probably not going to sleep well in the shelters, which is why I didn't choose to sleep in the shelters most of the time if I could get away with it, because I am a light sleeper. But if you're a deep sleeper, go in there, snore away, I guess. But I didn't much care for the snoring in the shelters. But again, these are all my personal opinions. Moving on, snakes. I don't like snakes, and I don't like the fact that there's venomous snakes on the AT. And yeah, I saw a fair number of them. I think in total, I saw about 6 rattlesnakes, almost stepped on one, and 2 copperheads, which was way more than I wanted to see. But you know, it does happen. And I'm not a big fan of snakes anyway, so they were bound to be on the things I hate list for sure. Now, moving on to the things I hate list, I would include the bog boards. And what I mean by that is up in New Hampshire and Maine, in the Alpines particularly, there are a lot of bogs. And they have these boards across them. And you hope, and I do appreciate all the trail maintenance people who try to keep us out of the bogs, but those boards just, for some reason, the one side never has an ending and they just drop down and you slide off them. So always test your bog boards because I got wet and muddy so many times on those things. So I really dislike the bog boards. And with the bog boards is the infamous 0.8 mile. I would look on my Far Out app, or there would be a sign saying only 0.8 more miles left to the shelter or wherever we were stopping for the night. And I found that 0.8 miles would last forever. At least it felt like it lasted forever. Like we entered some wormhole where just time never ended and this mile never ended. And it just, I don't know, it always felt like that 0.8 mile took longer than the last 16 miles that we may have hiked that day. So I guess perhaps it was anticipation of ending the day and you could just never get there fast enough. So the last 0.8 mile, not my favorite. As well, the concept of waterproof. Waterproofing on the AT, as many hikers will let you know, is a lie. There's no such thing as waterproof. Everything wets out at some point. Even the plastic bag. It won't wet through, but then you'll just be wet underneath because you sweated. So there's no such thing as waterproof. Just know that going. It's just easier because we all believe that waterproof is a thing and there's a possibility you could stay dry if you just managed it properly. And managing it properly will help you stay drier. And I say drier because you will never stay completely dry. It's just, I don't think it's a possibility on the AT. If someone can prove me wrong and you have an amazing system, I'd love to hear it because I did not experience that at all. Okay, moving on. Chafing. Now, I highlighted this in one of my videos and called it monkey butt. I'm sure there's plenty of other more colorful names for that. So if you have some, throw them in the comments. I would love to hear the other versions of monkey butt, but did not expect that. I hadn't really experienced monkey butt in Canada, maybe because we just, I don't know, don't have the same level of humidity where I was hiking, or I wasn't out long enough to get that chafing feeling. But yeah, that was really unpleasant. New to me, did not like it. Definitely up there with the things I really disliked about the AT. So bring your chafe cream, it'll save ya. One of the things I disliked about the AT is losing gear. And you know, that's really anywhere. It's not specific to the AT. But for me, the area that you're going to lose gear, if you're really going to lose it, is the Mahoosuc Notch. And that's where I lost gear. And I think a lot of people lose gear in this section because it falls out of your pack if you don't really have it tied down. And I lost a really good pair of prescription sunglasses and an Nalgene bottle. And there was no way I was going to get them back. I didn't even realize I lost the sunglasses, and I actually filmed that I lost them. And I was very sad about that because I'm like, I could have picked them up. I mean, maybe I couldn't. Maybe they slid down under the rocks and they were never to be found. But I really hated losing my stuff in the Mahoosuc Notch. So I'm not a big fan of that. And speaking of that particular area, I did mention in my favorites video about the Whites being one of my favorite areas, and it most certainly is. But the part that I really didn't like about the Whites was the cost of the huts. I would have really liked to stay at some of the huts, and I get that they can only, you know, it costs a lot to get everything up there and maintain them, so they do have to be expensive. I get that. But it would have really been nice to, you know, be able to stay in a bunk and have some of their food, because they have really good food up there. And yes, you can definitely do a work for stay. We did try it. I personally wasn't a big fan of it, but lots of people are. So that's great. And whatever works for you. It didn't work for me, but just because they're expensive and they probably need to be expensive doesn't mean I have to like them. So I don't like the cost of the huts. My personal opinion. And the final thing about what I don't like about the AT is the post-hike depression. Now, I think part of that is a biological thing. We're hiking, we're exercising every day, our bodies are producing endorphins, they make us feel good, and we're used to a certain amount all day because we hike all day. So when you stop that and you do very little exercise in comparison to a through hike, your body, it doesn't have those feel-good hormones anymore. So we kind of fall into a bit of a depression, or just your body's lacking that hormone that it wants to make you feel good. So for me, I didn't get into too much of a depression because I had Jeff, so the community aspect for me was a lot less. For some people, that's a huge part of it. But definitely you do find that when you're done the AT, you kind of like a little lost for a bit, and you got to figure yourself out again. And even though, you know, I have a career to go back to, and I have plans of what I want to do later, so that helps to alleviate it, but it's definitely a very real thing. So, you know, post-hike depression can be for any hike. It's not specific to the AT, of course, but that's just my experience. So I hope you liked and enjoyed this. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Do subscribe if you haven't already. And I will be talking about some other things about the hike as well to come. If you have any suggestions, or if there's something specific you want to hear me talk about, throw it in the comments below. Thank you for watching.